We turn our focus to tax matters as concerns continue to be raised about the unintended consequences of a wealth tax in the country. Now, some analysts say this would drive an exodus of skilled and wealthy citizens, while others have argued that there's no better time to implement a wealth tax. Business development consultant at Sovereign Trust, Dani van Vuuren, joins us for this discussion. Thank you so much for your time, Dani. I think let's first talk about whether there's tangible evidence of a wealth tax creating the said exodus.
Good morning, Tumi-san. Thank you for having me. I believe, depending on how one would look at it, there might be two views. One would be that there is absolutely a need for this, and that would be backed by the relevant ministers that we look up to. And that, on the other hand, would be whether it would drive people in a state where they would feel threatened and ultimately drive them out of the country to rather move in a space where they don't have to feel that there might be a looming increasing of tax and taxation on their wealth and their income, and potentially look at contributing to an economy of a different country.
Quite interesting, and I'm glad that you note and acknowledge that such a tax adjustment could be beneficial for the South African fiscus. And I'm also interested in finding out how then you would respond to the basic needs in South Africa, where the wealthy are taxed as opposed to South Africans that are living beyond poverty lines or under the poverty lines, having to be, taking up the tax burdens that we have, even in the likes of basic foods.
I think taxation cannot be looked in isolation, and specifically the wealth tax or the taxation of your ultra high net worth or just your high net worth individuals. It cannot be looked in isolation. When we look at that taxation, the thinking or the rationale, I believe, and my understanding, is that it is intended to bridge that gap so that the taxation on your lower income, your middle class client or customer or South African isn't as severe or severely felt as it would be perhaps with your higher net worth clients.
What's also interesting as a debate around this, Dani, is that the South African government has not necessarily pulled the trigger when it comes to that contested debate of a wealth tax. In your view, how would that look and pan out, and especially because we're going into the medium-term budget policy statement with a precarious economy in the country? What would a wealth tax look like in South Africa if it is to be implemented but also measured?
Absolutely. That's the question. It's really about, do we move forward with it? And what would it look like? What would be the percentage that they would look? Initially, when the Davis Tax Committee was to comment on that, they still are in the opinion that what would the percentage be? What would we look at? 3 to 7%? Would it be viable? How do we ensure it is sustainable? And again, to me, the question would be, would it be a counterintuitive action if we do impede a larger taxation that isn't seen as, quote unquote, a fair wealth tax?
Having said that, Dani, do we have examples where South Africa can look to say that maybe a wealth tax is not what the current economy needs?
There has been comments made around it, around the potential need to look elsewhere when the conversation of broadening the tax base is at hand. One would want to look at the policies that they would implement. I think personal and private businesses could get involved in comments around it when the policies are being discussed higher up, and ultimately the decision would be based on what the real need is. Initially, the need would be to help bridge that gap, those inequalities that we so severely do have in our country that needs to be dealt with, and also then additional costs that have crept up that we are now burdened with as a result of the pandemic, of course. But again, the question would be, would the wealth tax example cover one specific need or multiple needs, and would it be sustainable?
Lastly, is it an expectation in 2022 going into the MTBPS that there would finally be an announcement in this regard?
It point to Ms. Sang, ultimately also on other political and economic spheres and influences that we have in our country at the moment. We are, as you may know, looking at a potential grey list and what impact that would have on that need to tighten up our taxation. We have, of course, SARS that is currently dealing with the ultra high net worth individual tax units that is looking into tightening up their approach, their policies to the wealth that is in the country and South African based or originated wealth that is perhaps elsewhere.
Thank you so much for your insights. Dani van Vuuren is from the Sovereign Trust talking to us about the possibilities of a wealth tax in South Africa and the consequences thereof. We move